From the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome once again to the Empire Club of Canada. And a hush falls over the crowd. For those of you just joining us through either our podcast or our webcast, welcome. Before our distinguished speakers are introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests, and we have some fabulous ones today. So I would ask that each guest rise for a brief moment when I call their name, and typically this is where the MC says, hold your applause to the end, but we don't do that here. So clap as much as you want as soon as I call the names. Okay. Mr. Josh Basseches, Director and CEO of the Royal Ontario Museum. Ms. Andrea Cohen-Barrick, VP Community Relations and Corporate Citizenship, TD Bank Group. Ms. Jody LaRose, Marketing Consultant and a Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Next, we have Mr. Jim Fleck, Chairman, Business for the Arts, ex-chair of the AGO. I like the table banging. This is fun. Next is Ms. Anne-Marie Applin, President of Applin Marketing and another Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Ms. Valerie Pringle, broadcaster and journalist. Ms. Robin McCallum, the art curator for TD Bank Group. Mr. Stephan Jost, Director and CEO of the Art Gallery of Ontario. And once again, my name is Paul Fogelin. My day job, I am the Vice President of the Ontario Retirement Communities Association. It's a mouthful. And you're President of the Empire Club of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table. So this afternoon, the CEOs of both the ROM and the AGO are here with us to share their visions for their respective iconic cultural institutions in conversation with renowned Canadian journalist Valerie Pringle. Both leaders have arrived in Canada's largest city at a time where the world is seemingly entering uncharted territory, challenged from both an economic and political perspective. But what's the cultural perspective? Does the increased elevation of brand Canada in a global context impact our cultural identity as a nation? And what does that mean for our cultural institutions? I would argue that the role of cultural institutions are more vital now than ever before. Cultural institutions bridge and reflect the rich diversity of our communities and what is one of the most diverse cities in the world. They foster the notion of an open society, of shared values and global perspectives. They are centers of learning outside of the classroom, and they contribute to the exchange of ideas and points of view. So how are these institutions evolving to meet the 21st century needs of our communities? We're so privileged to be hearing firsthand from the two leaders who are leading the charge from the heart of these institutions. Josh Basseches joined the Royal Ontario Museum in 2016. He oversees all aspects of the ROM, Canada's largest museum of art, culture, and nature. Prior to joining the ROM, Mr. Basseches was Deputy Director of the Peabody Essex Museum. He partnered closely with the Director and Chief Curator on all major curatorial matters and was a member of the small team leading the museum's successful $650 million capital campaign. Mr. Basseches is completing a doctorate in art history at Boston University. He holds an MA in art history from Boston University, an MBA from the Harvard School of Business, and a BA in art history from Amherst College. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Basseches. Stephan Jost is the Director and CEO of the Art Gallery of Ontario. Appointed in 2016, Stephan joined the AGO after holding a 5-year post as Director of the Honolulu Museum of Art. That sounds like fun. Under his leadership, Homa's finances were dramatically improved. The education program expanded in reach and capacity, its membership increased by a whopping 64%, and the visitor experience was significantly energized. Prior to that appointment, Stephan was director of the Shelburne Museum in Vermont, the director at Mills College Art Museum in Oakland, and held several curatorial positions at the Allen Memorial Art Museum of Oberlin College in Ohio. Born in Michigan, Stephan holds a BA in art history from Hampshire College in Massachusetts and an MA in Art History from the University of Texas at Austin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speakers to the stage.
Well, this is fun. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah.
We're talking culture today, so it's a little different than the dose of politics, I guess, and economics that you get. And how exciting to have these two fabulous men who came the same month, April 2016, to Toronto and have really brightened up the landscape here, and to get their perspectives on what they're doing and what they think about the great motherships that they've been given charge of, the AGO and the ROM, wonderful Toronto institutions. Anyway, let me start off by talking about, getting people in the door, which is, obviously a preoccupation. What brings people now? Is it a big show? Do you target them? Do you know exactly what you want and how to go about it?
It's a lot of yes, yes, and yes. Of course, you need the big show, but you also need to make sure that it's not just cotton candy, that that people actually have a great time there. It's really about also making sure that people there's room for either a quiet time or a social time. So it's working on many levels simultaneously. Marketing is really key. Social media is unbelievably important.
And I might add, just stepping back from those good comments, that part of it is, what are you presenting? So no matter, setting aside the medium, is it an exhibition, is it a program, how you're marketing, is all of which are very important issues. The question is, are you delivering activities and programming that are relevant to people's lives? That are these the issues that people want to engage with, want to hear about, and make them feel like it's worth getting up, going out, and going to a museum?
And how do you figure that out?
Well, a lot of it, frankly, is, we talked about marketing and market research, is understanding your many different audiences, of which at institutions like ours, they're very broad, and assessing what are the issues that make a difference. We actually do quite a bit of study in advance of deciding, for instance, to take a major exhibition, whether it is both a topic that engages. Obviously, we have ones that we would choose to engage, and sometimes we find that they're ones that our various audiences are not as interested in, or that we have to change the nature of how we're going to present it to create that sense of activism and buzz, yeah.
Because, both of you have shows on now. There's George O'Keeffe, there's The Big Whale, in addition to all the other stuff. But I'm just thinking, in the olden days, if King Tut came to town, or Turner and his paintings, that was a big thing, Traffic stopped in Toronto, woohoo! Like, have you seen that show? And I don't know if that happens a whole lot anymore.
The audience attendance figures, both at the ROM and the AGO, are really high. I think we've had our best year last year since in 1993. You, I think, also had an extraordinary...
Yes, shared notes on that. It's been terrific. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're when you're clocking, for the last show we clocked 250 tickets every 30 minutes. That's a lot of people.
And young people.
Yeah. So we're roughly 40% of our audience is under 40. So some cultural institutions are struggling to engage kind of the millennials. Our struggle's a little different. Our struggles is, can we move fast enough to keep up with their interest? We're free Wednesday night. We get 3,000 to 6,000 people Wednesday night. And so that's a lot of people. That's...
And back to that issue of, are we engaging or hitting the topics? As Stephan said, both our institutions, I think, are in many cases hitting home runs. Our last year, we had 1,350,000 people coming through the door, which is the most in the ROM's history, and the most in the country, and not that we keep track, but in the top 40 in the world. So I think that's a demonstration that's
as of yesterday, I assume.
Yeah. We're keeping count, that's right. It'll be a little higher tomorrow. Yeah. But if you take something like, you mentioned the Blue Whale exhibition, that's a project that is steeped in the research and the science of the museum. And so it's an original show that also engaged with a topic that the public was very interested in, and frankly, the media was very interested in. So we were able to deliver something that was important, scientific, that addressed issues that are very much current day issues, and also, I would say, Canadian issues, given the issue of their stranding, those whales stranding.
So how do you measure success? You're a year in. Obviously, those numbers are making you happy, and you've had, some noteworthy donations, so those kind of things. Money counts.
Absolutely, yeah. But people invest in success. They'll invest once if you're in a financial crisis, but they tend not to save you more than once if you're. So first success is on time and budget. Like that's the board is very, very clear about that. And that in the long run is wise. Attendance, how many people come in. And then another metric we're looking at is growth in the under 35 crowd, because that really is about our future, and that's about a long-term investment. So, and then we do things more soft, like quality of art, like, you can get popular, but if it sucks, well, you're not really on mission.
Yeah. Well, I was going to pick up on that, and that we're all going concerns. We have to be business ventures. So the attendance, the financial metrics, the issues of having strong support. I mean, last year we had the strongest philanthropic support since 2009. So those are all good signs. But frankly, we're mission-driven organizations. And at the end of the day, and we think a lot about metrics and how you measure, at the end of the day, those are the necessary activities, but it's really how you're delivering experiences. It's looking at issues like, what is repeat visitation? Do people like what you're doing enough to come back? How long do they stay at the museum? Are they enjoying it enough to spend time? What is the visitor satisfaction numbers? What is the net promoter scores that tell you, are people saying that other people, do they want to come? So there are a lot of qualitative issues, some of which are easier to measure, some of which are harder to measure.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also like the big issues. So like last summer, we had an incredible show. Artist named Theaster Gates, African-American artist, works on the south side of Chicago. It's really about art and social practice, engaging the community. So last summer, major show, incredibly important topic. We do have to have conversations about race and class in Canada, right? You see what happens if you don't have those conversations, right? We had Black Lives Matter in the AGO facilitating a conversation about race, right? I'd rather have these conversations happening inside the AGO than kind of on the streets of Ferguson, right? So you really, it's not financially viable, a show like that, without incredible private philanthropy, but we need to promote these issues, we need to center it, and we need to, in the AGO's cases, we need to engage with these issues through great art, right? That's the key. Theaster is a fantastic artist. That's what we do, whether we're showing a Rubens or a contemporary African-American artist, great, but the issues we're talking about have to be central to what we need to solve for.
Mm-hmm.
All of those issues, I mean, the fact of the matter is we're going to try to encapsulate so many different concerns and issues into a relatively short period of time. But in terms of the points that Stephan just mentioned, I think two that are particularly important. And this is about, I mean, this is at the Empire Club, and we're talking about Canadian institutions. And when you're in Toronto, one of the exceptional issues is diversity. And you mentioned Black Lives Matter and addressing issues that relate to the Black Canadian community. Well, we have the good fortune, certainly at the ROM, and I believe also at the AGO, to have global collections that represent many, many of the communities that are here diasporically. And so we have that opportunity to say both, what can we do in China, and what can we do with Chinese Canadians that are here in this country? How do we address issues that matter to those groups? And I think, again, both our institutions, and I can certainly speak for the ROM, are tremendously well situated to address issues of importance globally, but issues of importance locally to the more than 50% of Toronto's community that wasn't born in this city. The way we do it, though, is through the authentic object. And that's another key part about what distinguishes a museum and a museum in the 21st century from other forms of engagement or entertainment, is that our institutions, museums, we are the holders, the stewards of exceptional collections. And everything that we need to do needs to use those collections and the research associated with it as a foundation and leverage point.
I mean, how many people here realize that the ROM, and I'm singing your praises here, I think the largest collection of Chinese art and artifacts outside of China. That's amazing. Like, can't think of a better thing to position yourself for the 21st century. I used to quip in Honolulu, our strategic plan was China, 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 India. That was, right? So, I mean, the ROM is very well set up, and Toronto is well set up. So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. How well is Toronto set up? I mean, when both of you are newcomers, how have you found that, and all other institutions that you have been acquainting yourselves with as well? And you talked about the diversity here, what you found, and what surprised you and what hasn't.
Well, aside from the fact that we are here and delighted to be in Toronto, I mean, one of the things I would just back up as a step that I knew when, why I was coming to this country, why I was coming to Toronto, and that was because of the ROM, an exceptional museum that I knew a great deal about before I got here. But as I was telling my lovely wife, who's joining me here in the audience here, I'll embarrass her a little bit, there's some wonderful museums that are in cities that you would not want to be in. And so to be at an exceptional museum, I'm not going to call those out. Someone else can call those out.
I mean, I think the highest functioning, most successful museum in North America is Toledo, Ohio. The Toledo Museum of Art just is
And when
great.
that job came up, Stephan?
I wouldn't apply for it, but it is a great,
I don't know,
great
either
place.
You could almost commute.
And if anybody here is from Toledo, apologies.
And congratulations for a great museum.
So Toronto is an exceptional city, and I've at least felt like the opportunities for running an institution, both I would say Toronto and the province and our connection with the province, which has been terrific, means that there's a commitment to art, culture, museums, to the research we do in natural history that actually have not found in the States. And so most of my career has been involved in institutions that are in cities where there is no city support, where there is no government support. So having that level of engagement in arts and culture, certainly our experiences, particularly at the provincial level, is exceptional and allows the ROM to be the institution that it is.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about the role of government, because that would be different.
It is very different.
For you guys, yous guys.
Yeah. Suddenly we're the Americans, yeah. In Honolulu, we got $10,000 of public money a year. So if the governor came...
Now it would be nothing.
And that was a good year, by the way.
If the governor came, you didn't have to go downstairs. I think it's incredibly important, the public money we receive. And it actually something we're constantly conscious about how we serve our public, how we serve our entire public, how we make sure that the AGO is part of the experience of being Canadian and becoming Canadian. It's important that you understand the traditional history of Canada, but also to give a platform to kind of ask the questions about what is art and culture in Canada moving forward. So we're balanced, public-private, and that's really important because it keeps us honest.
And that's an interesting point, too, about people who are Canadian and becoming Canadian. How do you attract new Canadians and make sure that, I guess, they feel welcome enough? And I know there are programs that are wonderful involved with the citizenship program where they get free membership for a year, et cetera, and encouraged to come. So people who are in this country, get some sense of history and culture.
Yep.
Well, to Stephan's earlier point, I think our institutions, and I'll speak specifically about the ROM, China, South Asia, I mean, whether global, whether different parts of the world, we represent, we work at the ROM, we have 70 researchers and we work in 27 different countries and 5 provinces in Canada. So I'm not sure all of you are aware that actually so much of what goes on is not what you see in the public galleries, but there's the exceptional quality of scholarship and research that's going on elsewhere in the building and around the world. But that gives us a leg up because it means that we can engage with those communities directly from a community-based, collections-based sort of perspective. And I would just mention, because I'm really delighted about it, we were able to make last week an announcement that we were launching the new Dan Mishra South Asian Initiative. And that came as the result of an extraordinary $5 million gift to the museum from Dan Mishra, a philanthropist who was born in India, came here in 1969, and felt that he made his money here, he had his success here, and he wanted to give back and make his legacy here, but he wanted to do it in a way that exposed not only members of the South Asian community, but other Canadians of all backgrounds to South Asian art and culture. So it's a remarkable gift, and it will allow us to do a tremendous amount of programming and outreach with that community. So that's just one example of how when you are both a global institution but are in such a global and diverse city, you have these opportunities for connections.
Sometimes I think the public doesn't realize how the AGO and the ROM are playing globally. Our current exhibition, George O'Keeffe, partnership with the Tate. The last exhibition, Mystical Landscape, partnership with d'Orsay. So right now, the main show in Paris is the Mystical Landscape show. I love the fact that contemporary France is learning about 19th century French art developed by a team of Canadians, right? It's, it's like, so it's really both institutions are playing globally, and culture is global now, and that question of how do you maintain that sense of, yeah, the group of seven's important to us, right? And simultaneously frame global conversations. It's that kind of a balance, right? We have to have historic stuff, but you come to the AGO and you'll see stuff that isn't yet trendy. It'll be trendy next year. Last summer's show by Herman Anderson, he was just nominated for the Turner Prize. In the contemporary art world, that is rock star kind of stuff. They cited the show here in Ontario, in Toronto. So London is looking to Toronto to find the best new British artist. Interesting.
Is that new?
That kind of global,
when you say global cultural?
It's moving, it's not new. There's always been, I mean, the Romans were global, but it's also it's increasing a lot quicker.
Globalization in the museum world and the art world is definitely an increasing phenomenon. And as Stephan was saying, we have, of all things, a wonderful collection of Egyptian art that's going to 2 museums in China. We have an exhibition of Japanese art, our third gender show that was presented last year that some of you may have seen, that's now in Manhattan. So these interplays of culture, art, science going in different directions are critical. And I guess I would say, to a point that we've discussed in the past, that being in Canada, and this is an insight that I've grown to understand as someone who is not from Canada but has the distinct honor of running a wonderful, iconic Canadian institution, is that there are opportunities for us, and I would imagine for you, that exist in the world as a Canadian institution that, say, we wouldn't have as an American institution.
Why? Just because?
Because of
the
larger political issues. So, for instance, you mentioned the way we connect with different audiences. Well, another audience that we connect with is we were able to give 10,000 complimentary tickets and had 10,000 new Canadian Syrian refugees at the ROM, as well as the roughly 7,000 year-long memberships, complimentary memberships that we give to new Canadians each year. But that Syrian issue and the role that Canada has played in the world in regards to Syrian refugees led to, for instance, an inquiry that came to us via the Canadian ambassador to Turkey about an opportunity to do a wonderful exhibition where Turkey that may come about, we're still in the early stages of looking at it, because we're a Canadian institution. It was very clear, had I been at the MFA Boston or the Met or any of or Peabody Essex Museum, that conversation wouldn't be occurring.
Why?
Because of the larger socio-political issues. But
I mean, would culture not rise above that? Would they care that much if you had good stuff and good ideas? Who cares if it's from America and Donald Trump's the president?
I'm going to kind of cut to the chase a bit.
I thought I was.
Culture is often in tension. If Canada doesn't define the global conversation through science and art, the conversation about freedom, democracy, respect for the individual, etc., somebody else will. And quite honestly, I'm not that interested in an oil-rich monarchy defining global conversations. I think we need to get out there, because if we don't lead, somebody else will.
See, we're converts. We're now like even more Canadian than Canadians.
I
don't mean to suggest, by the way, that those wonderful institutions that I mentioned aren't doing tremendous international shows, because they are.
Yeah.
But this particular opportunity.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to put it, because you wonder. We talked about, the world and how it's seeming scary politically, economically. Whoa, where is it going? Are things falling apart? So how is that reflected culturally? Does it feel that way culturally, or is culturally like thriving in the chaos and the uncertainty?
I mean, most, at least art museums in the United States, had a phenomenal last 20 years. I mean, right now, like the conversation at the Met, like what's their big challenge for the next 20 years is just dealing with capacity. Just too many people, right, coming. If you would have said in 1975, the big issue facing art museums would be too many people, right? You'd be like, nah, right? But you go to the ROM, I go there on a Saturday.
I'm actually still surprised that when you're telling me this.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
But you go to the ROM on a Saturday.
Okay, this is not the problem, by the way, we're worried about, just to be clear, Stephan. Bring them on is all I can say.
But how long do you have to wait to get a ticket, right? It's 10 minutes, because there's a lot of people there. Yes. We're doing well.
Wow, so how do you interpret that people like to see those objects? I mean, as you say, you're essentially authentic items and objects and art in your collections that people can wander and see and have quiet spaces and contemplate, maybe program. So what are people hungering for that they're like heading in there? It's not the restaurant, right?
Well, I'll engage in that in a particular way, which is we all know there's a tremendous amount of discussion about the digital world and how are museums and other institutions engaging with things digital. And something that, frankly, if we're not worrying about, I mean, any museum that was not worrying about that would be one of those ones that would be at the side of the road in 5 years. And there's many interesting aspects that probably all of you deal with in your own areas of work or life. But the point that I would like to make is some people are concerned about the notion, well, if we introduce different kinds of digital experiences in the museum, will that take away from the authentic object? And I don't feel that that's the case at all. And to sort of answer your question, people hunger for that object, but the way the digital, I think, makes sense is to augment and enhance the experience, to allow people's native curiosity for, whether it's the blue whale skeleton or an extraordinary Ming Dynasty ceramic or whatever, to start with that as the place of intellectual departure, the place of creative and curiosity, and then where can the digital tool take you to enhance your understanding and have it be something where you as the individual with your little handheld device can decide where you want to go with it. But all of that is based on the hunger for the authentic object and that you're not going to find that elsewhere. So I'm not really worried about the competition that comes from media or digital intervention. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Again, we've got great works of art. We love original works of art.
But you can see them on your computer, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can also listen to, somebody on the radio, but I'd rather see them in person. Right? So there is something about the original that is important. I actually think there's, in addition to the social media, huge, I think people want authenticity. We live in such a consumer society that maybe there's things that aren't totally market-driven. I think that's important. And I also think the decline of retail shopping is impacting us. I have no evidence of this, but when I was in high school, we'd go to the mall in Michigan, right? And it's interesting. I went back to Michigan. They built a great little museum, and then there's all these teenagers hanging out at the museum. And because the mall is kind of not so cool anymore, right? And I think
that is such an interesting idea.
I don't have any proof
Never
of this,
occurred to
but
me.
there may be these patterns changing because of Amazon, right? So.
Wow. We were talking a little bit before about, opera, not my fave, and that opera companies surviving, and maybe if they just did, Guys and Dolls or My Fair Lady, it might be a little more money coming in the coffers, although COC seems to be doing extremely well. But I mean, then I wondered, is there a line for you guys? Is there a bar you won't go beneath? Is something too low for you in order to bring people in, or that is below your mission, even though it would be hugely popular?
My instinct is to say no, but but really there is, yes. There is.
I'm sure that there is, but I actually don't even think about the question that way. I mean, historically, museums had a lot of sacred cows, the lines that you would not cross, the things that you were not supposed to do. And actually, I've found, and I'm sure you've found, that it's often by transgressing those lines, but transgressing in intelligent ways, things that actually serve your mission, that actually leads to success. And many of you may have seen, for instance, the tattoo show that we offered last year. And that saw about 120,000 people, about half again more than we anticipated. And if you're talking about things that are relevant in people's lives, there we have something that is about global culture. Basically, every culture on Earth has some tattoo tradition over the last 5,000 years. And it's something that more than half of people under 30 have a tattoos. But I can tell you, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, most museums would not have done a tattoo show. But my point there is, yes, it's transgressing. It's not low. It's just engaging in a way that says what's relevant to our audiences, and particularly new audiences.
And that wasn't too low.
Oh no, that was a wonderful show. We were delighted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it had grounding. It wasn't. I mean, anybody who went to that show could say, "I can understand why this is at the ROM."
I think we're kind of our no-fly zones are more and more. It's when it's so corporately linked. An exhibition of fashion from the Gap, sponsored by the Gap. No, right?
Okay.
So that's where not so much. Yeah.
And where does that sponsorship thing? Because obviously you thrive on sponsorship.
Oh, yeah,
you
yeah,
need
yeah.
sponsorship. Everybody does.
I mean, things like luxury retail love sponsoring art museums because it's one of the few things that actually is higher than their brand. So, Van Gogh is higher than Chanel, right? And so it's one of the few things that, in the hierarchy of
brands.
Of culture and brands, right? So,
that must be a little hard for them to admit, though.
Yeah, no, we don't talk about it, but they do donate. Yeah.
Well, the sponsorship piece obviously is important because part of the question is how can we make it affordable to present this material, and we are delighted to have some really wonderful corporate sponsors. But I do think that the point that Stephan is making is you have to separate the production side and the support side a little bit, and those shows where it gets a little bit blurred in terms of who's supporting what and how commercial does it seem. I think that is a line that most of us would.
This is the time we say thank you, TD.
That's right.
But when TD sponsors us, they don't tell us what our content should be, right? So there's kind of a division there, right?
And we probably wouldn't go to TD for our banking exhibition. There you are. So yes,
the history of the ATM.
So as you guys look forward, then you're thinking, okay, well, I'm thinking things are just Jake. People are screaming in your doors. Money's good. Audiences are good. Everything's happy. So why don't you just, leave while you're still ahead?
Are we being shown the door, Valerie? I don't know.
I want to get the vision thing then. Like, how do you get better than this?
But the reality is Toronto's changing really quickly. Can we change with it? Can we continue to do these engagements? Financially, we balance our budgets. We're always on the right side, but we're not flush. There's many, many more things. The reality is our staff is incredibly underpaid. They work really hard to make things happen.
And these institutions are wonderful institutions. By the way, and there are a number of people in the audience who are key supporters and key staff and others that are helping making this possible. And we're just part of very large teams that are helping these institutions to succeed. But one of the major issues, and it sort of gets to the topic of this, I think the topic that you provided for this talk, for this presentation, is the evolution and change in museums. And I think if we look at that question, museums are still chasing what it means to be a 21st century museum. We're now, 17 years into the new century. And the model definitely, I think there's a clear understanding that cultural consumption is changing. And I mentioned a little bit about the way that digital has an impact on what audiences are choosing to do. The fact that so many audiences want to increasingly have a great deal of option and opportunity and be able to do what we sometimes call curating their own experience, not having the authoritative museum voice saying this is what's important and this is what's important and come in and we'll tell you, but an interactive experience. So I think what we need to be looking at is changing demographics, changing audiences, and understanding that we want to move away from, the 20th century museum model was a transactional model. I'm going to go to a museum, I'm going to buy a ticket, and I'm going to see something specific or go to a program. What we're very hard at work doing is recognizing that that's not going to work 5, 10, 15 years from now because that's not the way, for instance, millennials engage with their cultural consumption. So what we need to do is make our museums far more open, far more porous than they are now, make it easier for people to come and go, and make it an experience where someone is saying, I am going to drop in on my museum as opposed to I'm going to buy a ticket to see what you have to show us. And I will say, and I'm going to take the opportunity here at the Empire Club, which is a fine place to make a little bit of announcement. On Monday, for instance, we're going to be releasing a statement that after 10 years, we're going to be reopening the wonderful heritage entrance of the museum.
Yippee-i-o-ki-yay. Woo! Thank you.
It's a wonderful thing.
It.
It's a wonderful thing. It speaks volumes in terms of architecture, heritage, and history. We'll have our exceptional contemporary Michael Lee Chin entrance. We'll have the wonderful Weston entrance. And I should do just a shout out that that has been made possible, back to your question about provincial support. I see our colleagues from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport. They've supported this project. The Weston Foundation has supported it. But in any event, the point is we said, how can we make it easier to come and go? How can we make a symbolic statement in Canada's 150th about being open to Queen's Park, open to the subway. And our goal is increasingly to make as much as possible of our first floor, possibly as much as 60,000 square feet, a zone where people can come and go, a salon zone where people can come, have a coffee, participate in a program, see some gallery experiences, whether or not they choose to buy a ticket and see the rest. And that's part of creating that more porous experience that is a 21st century experience that allows people that sense of, I'm going to just drop in this afternoon to see, my museum and talk with a friend there.
What have you got?
Well, I've got a couple things, but he put something right on. But Josh is bringing something up. So yeah, we want to be more porous. We want to be less transactional. Totally. But that's like fixing an engine while it's moving, right? It's really hard to do because we are very dependent on the transactional. So we know where we need to go, but getting there is actually really, it's not easy.
Is anyone doing it brilliantly besides Toledo?
We see a lot of
they're free
examples where it's not done so well. I mean, Indianapolis that had a charge, removed their charge, reasserted its charge. I mean, these are not easy issues. I don't know.
That would be a loser thing to do. It's like closing your front door.
Ironic. I'm just chuckling when I heard about the Weston entrance, which I love on the ROM. They got it right the first time. It's just really a super entrance. The AGO is opening a new entrance to Grange Park. The Grange Park is actually owned by the AGO. They're dropping $12.5 million into it.
Wow.
Yay. So there's this other side. As both institutions are adding more doors. It's quite
and
literal.
By the way, we do confer, so we are talking about what
I
makes
like
sense.
this collaboration. You do.
We want people to go to the ROM. It's about increasing the cultural sector, right?
And I think Stephan has really been leading that notion of collaboration and engagement and cross-marketing.
Yeah, which is so. I was going to say we do have room for some Q&A here, and so. I see a hand up there. Well, just before we get to your question, there's someone right in the middle. I had two little questions. One, somebody else's. My little question was, do you have an object that you love in the institution that you lead now? I mean,
yes.
I know when I go to the Met, I always just go to that Japanese gallery and look at the water
It's
stone.
in my office.
It makes me happy. You took it into your office?
So when I was a freshman at...
but the public can come up there and see it, right?
Anytime. It's, when I was a first-year student at Hampshire College, I wrote a paper on a pretty obscure German expressionist artist, Ernst Barlach, and it was a particular sculpture. And I go down in the storage. We show almost everything's in storage, right? Less than 5% on view. And there's this sculpture I wrote a paper on when I was 18. And so I was like, okay, I gotta bring that up.
Well, you have an art rental program.
Yeah, we have that too. Yeah, and you are welcome to see it. It's sentimental.
Well, I mean, it's a hard question that either of us, I don't have one that I wrote on specifically, so no, I'm going to tell you one, but not one that I wrote my undergraduate
paper was awful,
paper. I can't say that. But it is hard when you have literally hundreds of thousands of objects of art and culture or millions of natural history specimens. But I'm actually going to mention something that were two wonderful recent acquisitions. One on the art and culture side, which is we commissioned this exceptional Christian Dior, House of Dior dress called Passage Number 5, a really remarkable outfit. But in keeping with the ROM's tradition, not only is this an exceptional piece of fashion, but we documented it each stage along the way so that we were telling the story of how in a couture context fashion actually comes to be. And I think that's part of what we try to do at our institution, I know you do as well, which is undergird what we're doing about acquisitions with the research side and the scholarly side as well. And also on Monday, we're going to be, putting out a press release about this wonderful Ankylosaurus. Who knows what Ankylosaurus is here? Some hands go up. It's one of those exceptional dinosaurs that has this wonderful helm, armored helm, and a club tail. And we were able to acquire a spectacular example of this, and we have researchers finding out all sorts of interesting information, including the soft tissue that was preserved that allows you to see the armored eyelids that close on this exceptional Ankylosaurus. So needless to say, my day job's pretty good. I can be looking at the Dior dress or the Ming Dynasty vase or the Ankylosaurus all in one day.
Oh, you're such a fun dinner guest. Okay. I had someone contact me on Facebook Messenger. His name is Aaron Sugar, who's a scientist, and he's working and teaching in Buffalo right now. But his question, he said he'd love you to just briefly talk about the role of science and technology in conservation and art, radiography, CT scans, X-rays.
It's really cool. I mean, we have a whole team of conservators. So these are people who fix things, research things. There's a kind of a material science side of art history. This past fall, we did an exhibition on prayer beads, which are these medieval micro-carved prayer beads. Nobody knew how they were made, so we took them to the hospital and we did CT scans, and literally we could take them apart and then make a virtual reality experience of it. If you would have said to me the first time the museum is going to use a VR experience is for late medieval prayer beads, I would have said, you're crazy. but that's really kind of was an amazing use of it. Most of our science and technology is really in the team of conservators who are highly, highly trained, very specialist knowledges in how things are made, how to fix things.
If it's real.
Yeah,
there's a lot of that.
Yeah, we're doing fascinating stuff with. We have a big Rubens show coming up. What they're looking exactly at the layers of how he painted it. You can go through. It's almost like reverse painting, looking at how he created it. It's pretty cool.
Great institutions like ours have these phenomenal conservation departments, and the science is very sophisticated in terms of the types of machinery they're using, what they're able to determine. And yes, the issue of fraudulence is one of the areas that they're very good at, whether it's a Mayan ceramic that we were able to determine with this expertise. Actually, part of it was original and part of it was a 19th century add-on to make it sell. Or in our case, because we have both the conservation labs that deal with art and culture, but then we also have this wonderful mineralogy department that is able to look at materials and has very sophisticated equipment that allows us actually to see in a, say, Roman period sword what the metals are in a way that many conservation labs wouldn't have because of that expertise on the science.
You don't always get what you want. Sometimes you find out something you love isn't
too.
Good, right? So it cuts both ways.
I know, but really interesting to find that out. So sorry, if we get a mic there, or do you want to stand? Yeah, no, we can get a microphone to you.
My name's Ian Morris, and I'm at the Deanna Horton table. My question is about your role. Of course, you collect and you preserve and you protect a lot of very valuable works of art, but the ratio of what you have to what you are able to display is an issue, and I just wonder if you could talk to that and possibly compare statistics between your two organizations and where that fits on a world scale, and what can be done to increase the proportion of your collection that is actually available to the interested public.
I think we're a little different on this front. I think the AGO's goal is to have the world's best art we can possibly have, not to be the biggest collection, right? Where we want really the extraordinary examples by artists or time periods. That the ROM's collection, I know, is much more vast and goes in many, many more issues. I'm actually a fan of selective acquisition. I'm a fan of deaccessioning things that aren't very good to buy things that are better. Yes, we could triple the size of the museum, but that would move it from 5 to 15% on view, right? But really, I want to make sure we're focused on quality.
Well, just to respond a little bit and think about that, quality is certainly a central aspect of what we're doing also at the ROM. We collect a broader array of cultural objects and, of course, scientific objects, in addition to what might be purely examples or masterpieces, though having the same qualitative level in terms of what enters a collection has to meet a variety of very rigorous standards. But to the particular question, I guess I have two thoughts about that. Yes, we have a vast collection. In our case, it's, again, I think I may have mentioned 500,000 works of art and culture, 12 million specimens of natural history, one of the largest collections in North America. But the point about that is, first of all, not everything, in fact, much of that isn't necessarily exhibition material. It's not material that people would be particularly interested in some cases in seeing, but has tremendous scientific and research value. So I mentioned before that we have 70 people, 30 or so curators, and 30 plus other members of the curatorial team that are doing exceptional research and scholarship at all times. A lot of those collections have this meaning in the research side, but perhaps not on the display side to the same degree. The second point I'd make is, of course, that is one of the areas that the digital world can help us. And we, like I'm sure you, are seeking to get the most important works available and accessible online, even if they're not available and accessible in a gallery.
Would you ever send them out in a bus if you could insure it properly, like to get it out to people?
We do, actually.
Yeah?
We have collections that are in exhibitions, both the large-scale exhibitions like the one I mentioned at the Japan Society in New York or in China, as well as more community-based exhibitions that are collections that can go out to community centers and other places.
Yeah, so it would have huge impact. There's a man who doesn't know much about
yeah, we have,
art.
and Jim, of course, would never have any access to.
I don't know if his question will have much value. Jim Fleck.
I was just curious. Now we're in the digital world, and so much of a collection may now be available digitally. Have you ever thought of having a show curated by the public, where people vote on which items they'd like to see shown, and then you put together a show that's what they want, rather than what you want?
Well, certainly the notion of sort of crowd-oriented exhibitions is something you're seeing more and more in museums. So that's not uncommon. You do see it. I think there are other ways of getting at the same kind of idea in that we just opened, actually it's officially opening to the public on Saturday, tomorrow, and we had our opening event earlier this week, a show called The Family Camera. And actually that's a remarkable exhibition of family photography and looks at the role of family photography both as an art form and also the way that it shaped families, and particularly families that have experienced diaspora migration, where these family photographs are a crucial link to the past. But the reason I mention it is because in that show, which has about 200 objects, we actually did we threw the doors open wide and had a public archive process where we invited everybody to send in their family photographs to participate. We had about 60 different partners associated with the show. And it was another way of getting at that question of how do we have a multi-way exchange rather than one way, the authoritative download of the museum to others coming to the museum, but rather how do we learn in this case from the very families that has this photography? How do we share that and engage? So that's the way of the future.
I think there's this both and side, right? Because yes, you want to have that back and forth with your public, but we do have content specialty. There are people who know about 15th century manuscripts or the best contemporary art made in the last 30 seconds, right? And so there's this balance. We want to make sure that we're getting the best professional curators we possibly can, but we also want to make sure there's a back and forth dialogue, that professionalism does matter. Knowledge does count.
Entirely concur. And the movement is toward this multifaceted engagement, but institutions like the ROM, with its exceptional curatorial capacity, like the AGO with its exceptional curatorial capacity, you need the expert voice, but then you need to engage in a multi-pronged dialogue.
One more.
Okay, so here's the last question. So if we go back in time, say a couple of years ago, and this is for both of you, by the way, and so Josh, in your case, you have a perspective of the ROM, you hear about the ROM. Was there one thing that it was clear to you that the ROM should be doing that it wasn't doing, that you thought, when I get here, I'm going to do that? And the same case for you, Stephan.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that I announced that we're opening the doors on Monday would be an example of something that I am committed to, this notion of porosity and the coming and going and getting away from the transactional experience. There, of course, both of us, I'm sure, would say we are enamored, impressed, and love our institutions. That's not to say that there aren't many, many things that we need to be looking at and doing in terms of the different types of engagement.
You're going to turn the crystal?
That's not today's problem. So I guess I'll stop with the one I already...
So mine was kind of, we did it pretty quickly. When you used to walk into the AGO, there were these booths, and a lot of, back and forth, and you got to the booths, and I was like, God, this reminds me of something, this entrance experience. I just had this experience. What does it remind me? It's not a good one. It reminded me of passport control at Pearson, right? That was the kind of, so we got rid of those booths, and we put up a great sculpture by Michael Snow. So, that was just a quick one. The thing I wish we would have done, transformation, the building's beautiful, on time, in budget, the spaces are spectacular. I just wish they would have put Wi-Fi everywhere in the building. So that's the other thing.
And they didn't?
No, because it was, in 2008, it wasn't obvious that we're doing it now. In September, you'll have it. But that was the other little thing, like, I can't get any cell phone
Well,
signal
that
here.
was an interesting observation that I'll piggyback on. We're very excited about the work that we want to do with those. I mentioned those handheld devices and the digital sorts of things. And I, too, when I got there, said, we have this ambitious vision and strategy for digital that will make a tremendous difference. And then I realized that in large portions of the building, you couldn't even get an email come down on your phone. So we, too, are hard at work at that. Yeah. And we both have buildings that are rangy and complicated and hard to deal with.
Well, you guys are brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
The one thing they promised they would do is come and speak to the Empire Club, actually. That's what they vowed as soon as they came to Toronto. I have to speak to my people.
Thank you for having us.
So, Chanel versus Van Gogh, augmented reality, museums as the new malls. We covered some fascinating territory today. Tremendous discussion. It's my sincere pleasure to invite our sponsor for today, TD Bank, Andrea Barrett-Cohen, to provide the official thank you.
We'll underscore, we love our sponsors.
Yes, thank you very much. And we have a great archives collection at TD, so if you do want to do that show on the history of banking, we can chat about that.
We could do it, we just couldn't have you support it. That would be the good.
The trouble with three names is it's always confusing. So I'm actually on day 10 at TD Bank, but one of the things that really attracted me to TD Bank is they have a great history of supporting discussions on civic issues that matter and support for arts and culture as ways to build inclusive communities and our shared prosperity. And this discussion has intersected both. And so it's been quite brilliant in that. I think both Stephan and Jost really talked to us about how their institutions are the best of where we are today as a city, but also where we want to be. And that aspiration of where we want to be. And it was quite inspiring. And of course, Valerie, your ability to moderate an honest and energetic conversation. Wow. So I just wanted to thank all of you for your candor and your passion. And this has been one of the loveliest Friday lunches I've ever had. And thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Good guy.
There we go.
Almost there. We're going to wrap up very quickly. So thanks once again to our sponsor, to our speakers, and to our audience. I'd like to thank mediaevents.ca. They're our online event partner that broadcasts all our lunches live. The National Post is our print sponsor. And I want to put a quick plug in for our upcoming lunches. On May the 24th, we have both the EU and the German ambassadors at the Empire Club. And that'll be at 1 King West. And then on May the 29th, we have Dr. Eric Hoskins, the Minister of Health. So please join us if you can. Have a phenomenal weekend.